It was a crisp Tuesday morning in autumn, one of those days when the sun slices through the cold air like a blade. I remember it vividly because everything seemed too perfect to be real. Rachel had just left for work, and I stood by the kitchen counter, sipping coffee, thinking how great life was, or so I believed. Then, out of nowhere, my phone buzzed. It wasn't unusual for me to get early notifications, but this one stopped me in my tracks. A message from an unknown number. "You deserve to know what Rachel's been doing." My heart quickened. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the message, uncertain. I didn't respond immediately, but I couldn't just brush it off either. Suspicion, curiosity, and a hint of dread swirled in my chest. After a few moments, I opened the message, revealing an attached photo. It was Rachel, but not the Rachel I knew. She was in a dimly lit bar, sitting far too close to a man I didn't recognize. It wasn't just friendly. The guy's hand rested casually on her thigh, as though it belonged there. Her smile was unfamiliar, different from the one I had seen countless times. It was something else, something I had never seen her give me. My hands trembled as I stared at the image. It felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding, it was a betrayal, a perfectly wrapped bomb dropped right in my lap. I wanted to believe it was some kind of cruel joke, but deep down, I knew better. For weeks, I had sensed something was off. The late-night work trips, her phone constantly in her hand, the excuses that came a little too quickly. I had ignored it, convincing myself it was nothing. But this photo tore that illusion apart. I needed more than just this. I wasn't about to confront her with one picture. I had to be certain. So I called in sick to work and spent the entire day investigating, going to places in my mind I never wanted to visit. I sifted through her social media, emails, credit card statements, anything I could think of. Each discovery only added more fuel to the fire, until I hit the jackpot. A hotel receipt from the previous weekend, a hotel she never mentioned. And there, on the bill, was the guy's name. It was like watching a slow-motion disaster unfold, every detail of her double life coming to light. But I couldn't stop looking, couldn't stop torturing myself with every new revelation. By the time she came home that evening, my mind was racing, but I kept my cool. I acted like nothing had changed, kissed her on the cheek when she walked in. Asked her how her day had gone. She smiled and gave me the same rehearsed lines I had heard 1,000 times before. The worst part? She was so good at it, so bleep convincing. But the game was on now. I wasn't going to explode just yet. No, I was going to play my role perfectly until the time was right, letting her dig her own grave deeper and deeper. The following days blurred together, a series of calculated moves. I watched her carefully, but I didn't slip. Every smile I gave her, every casual conversation we had, was laced with my anger and hurt, but I made sure she didn't see it. I couldn't afford to tip her off, not yet. I needed more. Her routines became predictable. She'd head to the bedroom after work, always with her phone in hand. If I walked in, she'd quickly switch screens or lock it, flashing me that fake smile that once melted my heart. Now, it just made me sick. I began testing her, pushing the limits to see how far her lies would stretch. One evening, I told her I had to work late, making up some story about a project that required my attention. She barely reacted, simply replying, "Oh, okay, babe, good luck," like she was relieved I wouldn't be home. But here's the thing, I wasn't working. I drove across town, parked in a dark spot, and waited. I kept checking my phone, anxious, wondering if she was already planning something behind my back. Then around 9 p.m. I got the message I had been anticipating for days, heading to bed early, sweet dreams, yeah. Right. My heart pounded as I raced home. I wasn't planning to burst in and catch her in the act, no. I needed undeniable proof. So I parked 2 blocks away, slipped in through the side gate, and headed to the guest house where I had set up an old phone as a security camera just days earlier. A desperate move? Maybe, but I didn't care anymore. Through the tiny screen, I watched Rachel walk calmly into our bedroom, acting as if nothing in the world could touch her. Then it happened. 15 minutes after her goodnight text, I watched as she slipped into her sexiest black dress, the same one she wore on our anniversary years ago, and walked out the door without hesitation. My stomach dropped. There it was. No more doubts, no more hoping I was wrong. It was all real. Every late-night meeting, every excuse, it all came crashing down at that moment. But I wasn't finished, not by a long shot. I decided to follow her. This time, I tailed her, keeping my distance but never losing her. She drove across town and, sure enough, pulled into the same small boutique hotel from the receipt. My blood boiled, but I forced myself to stay calm. There was no point in rushing in now. I needed more than just suspicion. I needed cold, undeniable evidence to tear her web of lies apart. So I waited, watching as she met him in the lobby like they were longtime lovers. The rage burned inside me, but I remained rooted to my seat. This wasn't the time to act. That moment was coming soon, very soon. And just like that, I had what I needed. I pulled out my phone and started recording the way they touched, the way her face lit up around him. It was like watching a stranger, not the woman I had married, not the Rachel I had devoted my life to. But I held on to that anger, knowing I would soon use it against her. The drive home was silent. I didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't punch the steering wheel. I just planned. Every step, every word I'd say when the time came. It was going to be glorious. She had no idea what was coming. I realized I couldn't keep up this pretense forever. The truth weighed on me like a ticking time bomb, and the fuse was growing shorter with every passing moment. Each time she smiled or said, "I love you," it felt like a needle stabbing my chest. Still, I held back, waiting for the perfect moment to confront her, a moment that would be explosive, undeniable, and devastating. That day arrived sooner than I had expected. It was a Saturday morning when Rachel woke up unusually cheerful. She bounced into the kitchen, wearing my old hoodie, humming a tune she often played when she was in a good mood. The same woman who was sneaking out at night, leading a double life, stood before me as if everything was completely normal. "Hey, babe. Let's have a lazy day today," she suggested with a grin as she sipped her coffee. "I've been so busy at work, I just want to relax with you." I stared at her, and for a split second I almost admired how easily she could lie. But that feeling quickly vanished, replaced by something colder. "Sounds good," I replied, keeping my tone steady. "Let me just finish a few things first." I headed to the bedroom, pretending to grab my laptop, but in reality, I was setting everything in motion. My heart pounded not from fear, but from the anticipation of what was about to unfold. I scrolled through the video on my phone one last time, ensuring the angles were clear and the audio was perfect. Then I smiled to myself. This was it. When I returned to the living room, Rachel was already stretched out on the couch, flipping through TV channels, playing the part of the perfect wife. I sat down beside her, my hands nearly trembling with excitement. "Hey, I wanted to talk to you about something," I began, keeping my voice casual. She looked up, slightly distracted, but smiled, completely unaware. "Sure, what's up?" she asked. I locked eyes with her and saw the exact moment when she realized something was off. Her smile faltered for just a second, but she quickly recovered. "You've been working really hard lately, haven't you?" I asked, keeping the conversation light. "Yeah, it's been crazy," she responded, starting to relax again. "But things are finally calming down. That promotion was a big deal, you know. It's taken up a lot of my time." I nodded slowly, then pulled out my phone, scrolling briefly before looking her square in the eyes. The tension between us thickened. "Funny thing about that," I said, lowering my voice but keeping it steady. "I actually wanted to congratulate you on that promotion." Again, she smiled, visibly relieved that the conversation seemed to be heading in a positive direction. "Ah, thanks, babe. I know it's been..." I cut her off, holding up my phone. "Then I figured we could watch something together," I said, turning the screen toward her. "Like, say this." The moment her eyes landed on the screen, her face drained of color. I watched her reaction as the video played. The hotel lobby, the way she hugged him, the way they kissed as if no one else existed. Her eyes widened, her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She froze, utterly blindsided. I can explain," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. I leaned back, letting the silence close in around her. "Explain?" I asked, almost amused. "Go ahead, Rachel. I'm listening." She fumbled, searching for an excuse, but the words wouldn't come. Her once confident, composed self crumbled in an instant, replaced by someone scrambling, panicking, like a cornered animal. "It's not what it looks like," she began, but I cut her off with a cold laugh. "It's not what it looks like," I echoed, my voice rising. "You're telling me it's not you sneaking out to some hotel with him? Not you kissing another man when you're supposed to be at work meetings? I have the effing video, Rachel. What are you going to say next, that this is all just a misunderstanding?" She blinked, still grasping for something to say, but I didn't give her the chance. I leaned forward, close enough to see the panic in her eyes, and whispered, "Let's see how you explain this in court." Her face twisted, and in an instant it was as if a switch flipped inside her. She stopped pretending. The soft, panicked tone disappeared, and her eyes narrowed. So what? She snapped, her voice now sharp. "You think you can just throw this in my face and I'll beg for forgiveness? You've been so effing clueless for months, and now you want to play the victim? Please." For a moment I froze, caught off guard by the sudden shift in her attitude. It wasn't fear or guilt driving her now, it was anger. Pure, raw anger. "Don't act like you didn't push me to this," she continued, standing up and tossing the hoodie onto the couch. "You've been checked out for ages. Always at work, always distracted. I needed someone, and guess what? I found him. It was like watching a mask fall off, revealing the person I never wanted to see." She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't sorry. She was justifying it, twisting the blame onto me as if this whole thing was my fault. "You're unbelievable," I muttered, shaking my head. She shrugged, as if she didn't care anymore. "Believe what you want, but I'm not the one who killed this marriage. You did." I stood there, stunned. She wasn't just a liar, she was driving the knife deeper. But what she didn't realize was that this was exactly what I needed. Her true self, laid bare, was all the proof I required to finally walk away from this wreckage. And I was ready. Her words hung in the air like poison, seeping into every corner of my mind. "You killed this marriage," it was almost laughable. I could barely recognize the woman standing in front of me, spitting venom. There was no remorse, no regret, just a twisted attempt to rationalize her betrayal. But in that moment, something clicked inside me. Any lingering doubt or confusion I had vanished. This was war now. I sat back down on the couch, trying to control the storm raging within me. I couldn't let her see how deeply she'd cut me, not yet. She paced around, arms crossed, throwing out lines like "you were never home" or "you didn't care about me." As if those were valid reasons to destroy everything we had built together. But I remained calm, cold even. "So that's it. Ha," I finally broke the silence. "This whole time you've been lying to my face, sneaking around, and now you want to blame me for it." She shot me a look that was somewhere between frustration and disgust. "It's not just about sneaking around, you don't get it. You stopped paying attention to me, stopped being there for me. What did you expect? For me to just sit around and wait for you to notice? I'm not some effing trophy on a shelf." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "So you really believe sleeping with someone else was the solution to our problems? That's how you decided to fix things?" I asked, my voice laced with bitterness. Rachel rolled her eyes and crossed her arms, leaning against the wall like the conversation was beneath her. "You think that's all there is to it, don't you?" "Like everything would have been fine if I hadn't cheated," she shot back, her tone dripping with sarcasm. I interrupted sharply, not letting her sidestep the truth. "Don't sugarcoat it, Rachel. You didn't find someone you didn't need, someone you cheated. Just call it what it is for a brief moment." I saw her flinch, but then her expression hardened. She wasn't about to back down. "Yeah, fine, I cheated. But you pushed me to it. You think I wanted to do that?" "No, I didn't have a choice." My heart raced as anger surged through me. I stood up, no longer able to hold back. "No choice? You're seriously standing here blaming me because you couldn't keep yourself in check?" "That's rich, Rachel," she glared at me, but I wasn't done. "I was there for you every single day, supporting your career, your ambitions. And how do you repay me? By sleeping with someone else and blaming me for it." Her face twisted with frustration, but the fire in her eyes was fading. She could see I wasn't buying her excuses anymore, and I was pushing back harder than she'd expected. "I never wanted this," she snapped. "I didn't want things to go this far. But it happened. And you know," Rachel, I cut her off, stepping closer, my voice low and menacing. "You chose this. You decided to lie, sneak around and betray me. Don't you dare act like you're the victim here." She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. For the first time in this entire mess, she seemed unsure, like the ground beneath her was finally starting to give way. I pressed on, fueled by the months of suspicion, the weeks of betrayal, the days I had spent preparing for this moment. "You know what hurts the most?" I asked, my voice quieter now, but dripping with bitterness. "I trusted you. Even when things felt wrong, I gave you the benefit of the doubt. I thought maybe I was just being paranoid, that you'd never do something like this. But I was wrong. You were gone long before I ever realized it." She swallowed hard, her defenses crumbling as she realized she had lost control of the situation. I could see her mind racing, searching for a way out, but there was none, not anymore. "I don't know what you want me to say," she muttered, her voice barely audible now. The confidence, the arrogance, it was all fading away. "I'm sorry, okay? I messed up, but you weren't perfect either." I almost laughed at how pathetic her apology sounded. There was no sincerity behind it, just a weak attempt to save face, to cling to whatever power she thought she still had. "I don't want your apology," I said, my voice cold as ice. "Not anymore." I pulled out my phone again, opening the video that had shattered my world just days earlier. "I already have everything I need, Rachel. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to pack your things and leave. Today." Her eyes widened in shock. For the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. "Wait, what? You're kicking me out?" Just like that. Yes, I replied without hesitation. Just like that, she started to stammer, her voice trembling. But where am I supposed to go? I don't have anywhere. I don't care. I cut her off, the finality in my tone unmistakable. You made your choices. Now you live with them. A heavy silence followed as she processed my words. She glanced around the room, as if seeing it for the last time, realizing everything she had built here was slipping away. I could see her trying to weigh her options, looking for a way to escape this, but she couldn't. I watched as the reality of the situation finally sank in. She had lost. Fine, she muttered hollowly. I'll go. She stood there for a moment, frozen, her face a mix of disbelief and anger. I could see her mind racing, trying to grasp how everything had spiraled out of control so quickly. It was like the weight of her lies had finally come crashing down on her, and for the first time she understood that there was no talking her way out of this. No more excuses. No more manipulation, just consequences. She looked at me, her eyes flickering with desperation. Are you serious? She asked, her voice shaking but still carrying a hint of defiance. You're really kicking me out after everything we've been through? I stared at her in disbelief at the audacity of her question. After everything we've been through? You did this, Rachel. You burned everything we had to the ground. You don't get to play the victim now. She flinched, but still wasn't ready to give up. So what? You're just going to throw me out like I meant nothing. I could feel the anger rising again, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't going to let her drag me into another pointless argument. I'm not throwing you out. I'm giving you exactly what you deserve. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She was cornered, and she knew it. Then, in a last-ditch effort, she changed tactics. Her face softened, and she took a step toward me, her voice turning gentler. Look, I know I screwed up, she said, almost pleading now. But can't we just talk about this? We've been together for so long. Doesn't that count for something? I made a mistake, yes, but we can fix this. I saw the shift in her eyes. This wasn't an apology, it was another move in her game. She thought she could manipulate me again, play the emotional card, and I'd fold like I always had before. But not this time. I shook my head, my words firm and final. No, Rachel, we can't fix this. You didn't just make a mistake, you made a choice. Again and again, you lied to me. You betrayed me. And when you got caught, you tried to pin it all on me. That's not something we can come back from. Her eyes widened, filled with shock and disbelief, as if she hadn't expected me to be so firm. She blinked, and for a brief moment I thought I saw genuine fear. But it wasn't the fear of losing me, it was the fear of losing the comfort, the security, the life we had built. But where am I supposed to go? She asked, her voice cracking slightly. You can't just throw me out like this. I need time, I repeated, raising an eyebrow. You had all the time in the world to come clean, to be honest. But instead, you used that time to lie, to sneak around. So no, Rachel, you don't get more time. Pack your things. You can stay with him for all I care. At the mention of him, I saw a flicker of discomfort cross her face, but she quickly masked it. She opened her mouth to say something, probably another excuse, but I was done listening. I turned away from her and pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contacts. What are you doing? She asked, panic creeping into her voice. Calling a locksmith, I replied calmly. You've got 2 hours. After that, the locks are getting changed. Are you serious? She almost laughed, disbelief coloring her tone. You're really doing this? After all these years, I glanced at her, the coldness in my voice shocking even to me. Yes, Rachel. After all these years. Yes, I'm really doing this. She stood there, momentarily speechless, realizing there was nothing left to say. The atmosphere in the room felt heavier, almost as if the walls themselves were closing in on her. With one last frustrated sigh, she stormed off to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating, but in a strange way, it was also a relief. I had been stuck in this situation for months, maybe even longer, and now it was finally reaching its conclusion. But that didn't make it hurt any less. I stood there, staring at the empty living room, my mind racing through everything that had unfolded. How had it come to this? I had heard stories about cheating, about people discovering that their partner was living a double life. But those stories always seemed distant, things that happened to others, not to me. Yet here I was, standing in the wreckage of my marriage, wondering how I had missed all the signs. How had I been so blind for so long? It wasn't just the betrayal that stung, it was the realization that everything I believed we had, all the trust I placed in her, had been built on lies. How do you even begin to move on from that? As the minutes passed, the anger that had been burning inside me slowly morphed into something else, something colder, more resolute. I wasn't going to let her destroy me, not like this. An hour later, Rachel came out of the bedroom. Her eyes were red, but her expression had hardened. She had a couple of bags packed, and for the first time she looked small, almost vulnerable. But I didn't let that affect me. I wasn't falling for the act again. "Is this really what you want?" she asked softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. There was no fight left in her. I nodded. Yes, she stood there for a long moment, as if waiting for me to change my mind, but I didn't. After a few seconds, she sighed, picked up her bags, and headed toward the door. Just before stepping out, she paused and glanced back at me, her eyes searching for something, maybe forgiveness, maybe regret. I wasn't sure. But she wasn't going to find any of that here. "Goodbye, Rachel," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. And with that, she walked out, the soft click of the door closing behind her feeling like the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. As the silence enveloped me, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It was over. Finally over. But even as the relief washed over me, a deep emptiness followed right behind it. The house, once filled with memories, now felt cold and hollow, like the echoes of what had been were still lingering in the air. But one thing was certain: I was done living in her lies. The house felt eerily quiet after she left. It was the kind of silence that creeps up on you, pressing against your chest, making the air feel thick and heavy. I stood there for a while, staring at the door, half expecting Rachel to burst back in with one final plea. But she didn't. The emptiness settled in like a fog. I wandered through the house, the weight of the past few weeks pressing down on me with each step. It was strange, seeing what was now my home like this. So much of it had Rachel's touched: the bookshelves she had organized, the paintings she had chosen, even the kitchen with that ridiculous love sign she insisted on hanging. Everything felt tainted by memories. For a brief moment, I wondered how I would ever be able to rid myself of it all. The adrenaline from our confrontation had worn off, leaving behind a dull, hollow ache in my chest. It was like the calm after a storm, but with debris scattered everywhere. My mind kept replaying the scene, her expression when she realized I had caught her, the way she tried to twist everything back on me. But there was no point in dwelling on it. The damage had been done long before today. I sat down on the couch, staring into nothingness, still unable to fully grasp what had happened. 12 years of marriage just gone. Not broken by one single moment, but by countless small choices she had made along the way. I had always believed we were stronger than that, but now everything seemed so fragile, as if the life I thought we had was made of glass, and I had been too blind to see the cracks. The worst part, I wasn't as angry as I thought I would be. The rage that had fueled me earlier, the need for confrontation, had faded away, leaving only a deep, aching sadness. I wasn't just mad at her, I was mad at myself. How had I missed the signs? How had I let things get this far? I wasn't naive enough to think our marriage had been perfect. No relationship is. We had our rough patches, sure, but I had always thought they were things we could work through. But Rachel's betrayal wasn't just an affair. It was a reminder that all the little things I had dismissed, all the times I brushed off my gut instincts, had been warning signs, and I had ignored them. I replayed every late-night phone call, every strange text she brushed off, all the times she came home with excuses that felt a little too rehearsed. I convinced myself she was just busy, that work stress was causing her distance. I trusted her completely, and she shattered that trust without a second thought. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent weeks preparing for that confrontation, gathering every piece of evidence, tracking her every move like a detective solving a case. But in the end, none of it mattered. She had shown her true colors in those final moments, cold, unapologetic, blaming me as if she hadn't orchestrated the entire collapse of our marriage. I picked up my phone, scrolling through my messages almost automatically. The video was still there, the one that had changed everything. I watched it again, not because I needed to, I had seen it enough times, but because I wanted to remind myself that this wasn't all in my head. I hadn't imagined her betrayal. It was real, right there, in high definition, her with him, laughing, touching, sharing moments I had no part in. And yet, even as I watched it, part of me couldn't help but wonder, was there something I could have done to save us? If I had caught on sooner, if I had confronted her before she slipped away completely, could I have changed the outcome? I hated that part of me was still searching for answers, still trying to make sense of the wreckage. But the truth was clear now: there was no saving what we had. Maybe there hadn't been for a long time, and I was just too blind to see it. I set the phone down and looked around the living room. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. This wasn't the place where we had shared lazy weekends, where we argued over dinner plans or laughed at silly TV shows. This house was now a reminder of what we once had and what I had lost. And it was haunted, filled with the ghosts of Rachel and the memories of our life together. I stood up, pacing the room, feeling the weight of it all bearing down on me. I had to make a choice. I couldn't stay here, surrounded by the remains of a life now stained by betrayal, but I also wasn't quite ready to let go of everything not yet. Moving on didn't feel real yet. For so long, I had been consumed by her betrayal, plotting my next move that now, without the constant hum of anger, I didn't know what to do with myself. As the hours dragged on, I made a mental list of the practical things: the divorce, dividing assets, how to break the news to family and friends. But dealing with the emotional fallout seemed impossible to even begin. One thing was clear, though: I couldn't keep living in this limbo. Eventually, I grabbed my jacket and keys. I needed to clear my head. The house felt suffocating, and if I stayed there any longer, I'd drown in the memories. The cool evening air hit me like a slap, sharp and grounding. As I walked down the street, the world seemed off, almost surreal. Couples passed me by, laughing, talking, living lives that I could no longer relate to. I was on the outside now, one of the broken ones. A guy whose wife had been unfaithful, whose marriage was over, who had to start his life again from scratch. But as I kept walking, something shifted inside me. Maybe it wasn't full acceptance, not yet, but it was close. This was my new reality, and I had to face it. No more looking back, no more hoping for something that would never happen. Rachel was gone, and so was the future I thought we'd share. And maybe, just maybe, that wasn't the end of the world after all. The cold night air seemed to strip away some of the weight I'd been carrying. Each step felt like I was moving farther away from the wreckage of my life, though I knew there was no real escape. The divorce, the questions from friends and family, the whispers and stares, they were all waiting for me. But for now, in the open air, there was an odd sense of peace. I wandered aimlessly, no destination in mind, my thoughts a mess as I replayed the events of the past few months over and over. But I kept walking. That's what I needed to do now, just keep moving forward. Even if it felt like I was navigating a minefield. Before long, my phone buzzed. For a second, my heart leapt, some ridiculous instinct making me think it might be Rachel. But when I checked, it was a message from Tyler, my best friend. The same Tyler who had sensed something was wrong with Rachel long before I did. "Hey man, haven't heard from you in a while. Let's grab a drink." Tyler had always been straightforward. He wasn't the type to beat around the bush. He probably didn't know the details yet, but he wasn't stupid. He knew something had gone down. I considered ignoring the message, not feeling ready to face the questions, the sympathy, the inevitable talk about what went wrong. But at the same time, I didn't want to be alone with my thoughts either. "So," I replied, "sure. Meet you at Murphy's." In 20 Murphy's was our usual spot. A quiet bar on the edge of town where the bartenders knew our names and the drinks were always strong enough to drown out whatever was weighing us down. It felt like the right place to go tonight. When I arrived, Tyler was already seated at the bar, sipping on a whiskey. He looked up as I walked in, his usual grin fading when he saw the look on my face. I sat down next to him, not saying a word as the bartender slid a beer in front of me. I took a long drink, the cold liquid rushing through me, calming the storm inside. Tyler glanced at me from the corner of his eye. "What's going on, man? You look like hell." I let out a dry laugh. "You have no idea." He turned to face me fully, his expression serious. "Talk to me. What happened?" I stared at my drink, swirling it around, searching for the right words, but there was no easy way to say it. "Rachel cheated." For months, Tyler's eyes widened. For a moment, it looked like he was about to say something, but he just waited, listening. I didn't hold back. I told him everything about the late-night work meetings, the lies, the hotel, the video, and the confrontation. Each detail spilled out like a confession, and the more I talked, the more real it all felt. Saying it aloud was the final step in accepting that my marriage was over. When I finished, Tyler sat back, shaking his head slowly. "Damn." I knew something was off, but I didn't think she'd actually. I nodded, taking another long sip. Neither did I. Silence stretched between us, the kind where your friend is trying to find the right thing to say but doesn't want to make things worse. Tyler wasn't one for empty words, and I appreciated that. Finally, he spoke again. "So what's next?" "You're filing for divorce." I nodded. "Yeah, there's no fixing this." She didn't even try to apologize, really. She just blamed me for everything, like it was my fault she was sleeping around. Tyler's jaw clenched, and I could see the anger rising in him. He'd always been protective. "Man, what a piece of—" "I know," I interrupted, not wanting to go down that road again. I'd spent enough time hating her for what she'd done. I didn't need to keep fueling that fire. But Tyler wasn't ready to let it go. She's trying to make you the bad guy? After all that, I gave a bitter laugh. She's good at it. She flipped the script so fast it was like she'd been rehearsing. Tyler shook his head again, disbelief and anger etched on his face. I just don't get it. Why not just tell you if she was that unhappy? Why blow everything up like this? That's the part one don't get either, I admitted. I thought we had problems, sure, but nothing like this. I thought she'd come to me if things were that bad. We sat quietly for a while, both of us lost in our thoughts. Tyler was just as baffled as I was, but there was no point in trying to make sense of why she did what she did. People who lie and cheat don't always make sense. And maybe that was the hardest part, accepting that I might never get a real answer. After a while, Tyler leaned forward, his tone softening. You know, it's probably a good thing you found out now. Better than staying in a marriage that was already dead, yeah, I replied, though the words felt hollow. It was true, but that didn't make it hurt any less. And don't worry about the divorce stuff, Tyler added. I'll help you with whatever you need, lawyers, paperwork, splitting up the house, whatever. You're not going through this alone. I nodded, grateful for his support. But the truth was, the idea of going through the divorce, of disentangling our lives from each other, felt overwhelming. Splitting everything we'd built together, figuring out who got what, dealing with the legal mess, it all seemed too much right now. But I knew I didn't have a choice. The process had to begin, and I knew I had to face it head-on. We sat there for what felt like a long time, the weight of everything slowly sinking in. Tyler didn't bombard me with more questions or try to give me a pep talk about moving on or starting fresh. He knew better than that. He just sat with me, allowing me the space to process things in my own way. Eventually, after a few more drinks, I started to feel a bit lighter, like the pressure inside my chest had eased a little. The world outside didn't seem so suffocating anymore, and for the first time since Rachel had left, I could see a path through the fog. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wouldn't happen quickly, but I knew I could make it through. Tyler was right, this wasn't the end of everything, just the conclusion of something that had been broken for a long time. And maybe somewhere on the other side of this, there was something better waiting for me. The morning after meeting Tyler, I woke up feeling oddly clear-headed. No fog, no numbness, just a strange sense of calm. It was as though the storm had finally passed. The bed felt too big, too empty, but I was getting used to that. The weight of the past few weeks was still there, but it no longer suffocated me like before. I got up and wandered into the kitchen. The house was quiet, painfully so. No sounds of Rachel moving around, no music playing as she made coffee. I stood there for a moment, soaking in the silence, and for the first time I didn't hate it. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my phone and made the call I had been dreading, the one to the divorce lawyer. The receptionist transferred me, and soon I was explaining the situation to someone I had never met. She was kind, professional, and promised to schedule a consultation as soon as possible. It felt surreal to be setting up a meeting to officially end the life I had built with Rachel, but I knew it was the only way forward. There was no turning back now. Once that was done, I felt a little lighter, like a piece of the puzzle had finally fallen into place. The wheels were in motion, the paperwork, the legalities, the process of untangling our lives. It scared me, but it also felt freeing. Later that morning, I started sorting through some of Rachel's things. She hadn't taken everything when she left, just a few bags of clothes, but traces of her were still scattered throughout the house. Her shoes lined up by the door, her favorite mug in the kitchen, a few of her books still on the shelf. I stood there for a long time, staring at her things, wondering what to do with them. Part of me wanted to throw everything out, dump it on the lawn, burn it, anything to erase her presence from the house, but that felt too dramatic, too emotional. I didn't want to give her that kind of control over me anymore. So instead, I carefully packed it all up, one box, neatly folded clothes, books stacked, and a few small trinkets she'd collected over the years. I taped the box shut and left it by the front door. She could come pick it up whenever she wanted, but it wouldn't be sitting around reminding me of her anymore. It was a small step, but it felt like progress. That afternoon, I called my parents. I hadn't told them yet. In fact, I hadn't told anyone besides Tyler. I wasn't ready for the wave of sympathy, the questions, the well-meaning advice, but it was time. They had a right to know what was happening. My mum answered on the second ring, her cheerful voice cutting through the quiet. "Hey, honey, how's everything going?" I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. "How do you tell your parents that your marriage is falling apart?" "Not great. Actually," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "Rachel and we're getting a divorce." There was a pause, and I could almost hear her processing the news. "Oh, sweetheart," she finally said, her voice full of concern. "I'm so sorry. What happened? I didn't dive into the details. I couldn't. I just told her that things hadn't been working for a while, that Rachel had been unfaithful, and that I was filing for divorce." She was shocked, of course, but she didn't push for more information. She just listened, her voice soft and comforting, offering to come stay with me for a few days. "Thanks, Mom," I replied, "but I think I need some space right now. I'll be okay. I just need to figure things out." "I understand," she said, though I could hear the worry in her voice. "But promise me you'll call if you need anything. We're here for you, no matter what." "I will," I promised, even though I wasn't sure what I would need from anyone right now. Support, maybe. But mostly I just wanted time to process, time to think, time to figure out who I was without Rachel. After I hung up, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Telling my parents made it all the more real. The life I had built with Rachel was officially over, and now I had to start picking up the pieces of whatever came next. The rest of the day passed quietly. I kept busy cleaning, sorting through paperwork, doing anything to keep my mind from drifting back to the past. There were moments when the pain hit hard, when I remembered small things about her: a laugh, a look, the way she used to make breakfast on Sundays, and it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. But each time I reminded myself that the woman I was remembering wasn't the same one who had left me. Not anymore. That evening, I found myself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, really looking at myself for the first time in what felt like forever. I barely recognized the man staring back at me. Dark circles under my eyes, tension etched into my jaw, my shoulders slumped as if I had been carrying the weight of the world for too long. I ran a hand through my hair, letting out a slow, deep breath. This was it, this was my life now, and as much as it terrified me, it also felt like a blank slate. No more lies, no more pretending things were fine, just me, rebuilding from the ground up. It wasn't going to be easy, I knew that. There would be more difficult days, more moments when I'd miss her, more times when I'd question whether I could really move on. But I also knew that staying stuck in the past, holding on to the pain, wasn't an option. I had to keep going. I had to keep moving forward, even if I wasn't entirely sure where the path would lead. As I turned off the bathroom light and headed to bed, I realized something for the first time in weeks. I wasn't dreading tomorrow. I wasn't waking up to the same nightmare repeating itself. Instead, I was waking up to something new, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. The next few weeks passed in waves. Some days I felt like I was finally putting the pieces back together, making progress. Other days the weight of everything hit me like a freight train. But I kept moving forward inch by inch, step by step. It wasn't about trying to forget Rachel because I couldn't, not yet. It was more about discovering who I was without her, figuring out who I wanted to become. The divorce process began slowly, as these things often do. The paperwork was tedious, and the meetings with the lawyers were even worse. Rachel and I communicated only through email or our attorneys, each exchange feeling colder than the last. She pushed back on a few things, likely hoping for some leverage, but there wasn't much to fight over. I wanted a clean break, and deep down I think she did too. Surprisingly, it wasn't the legalities that hurt the most. It was the ordinary things: the day I had to go to the bank to split our accounts, realizing I had to update my emergency contacts and remove her name, or seeing an old photo pop up on my phone from years ago when everything felt solid real. But even in those moments, I could feel myself getting stronger. It was like shedding old skin, painful piece by painful piece, until I could feel someone new underneath. One evening, a couple of weeks after Rachel had left, I found myself sitting outside on the back porch. It was quiet, the kind of peaceful silence I used to take for granted. The stars were out, the air crisp, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't drowning in my thoughts. I took a deep breath, sipping my beer, letting the calmness of the night sink in. It wasn't perfect, and I wasn't fully healed, but I was getting there, slowly. In that moment, I realized something I hadn't before: Rachel's betrayal, as painful and devastating as it had been, didn't define me. It didn't get to be the story of my life. I was more than what had happened to me. It wasn't just about surviving the affair or the lies, or even the divorce. It was about rediscovering who I was without all the weight. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of that. The thought of starting over didn't scare me like it had before. In fact, it almost felt liberating. The next morning, I woke up with the same sense of clarity. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, and I didn't feel the usual pang of dread. Instead, I felt ready to let go, ready to move forward, ready to stop letting Rachel's actions dictate my every thought. I wasn't pretending I was fully over it, but I had decided to stop letting it control me. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my messages. I hadn't talked to many people recently. Tyler had been checking in here and there, but I had mostly kept to myself. Today, though, something was different. I shot him a text, "Hey, let's grab that drink again sometime. I'm in a better place now." His response was immediate, "Hell. Yeah, I knew you'd bounce back, man. Let's do it this weekend." I smiled, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. The world outside my little bubble was still there, waiting for me. I had kept myself locked in this emotional prison long enough, but now it was time to rejoin life. That day, I spent hours cleaning the house. It wasn't just about tidying up, it was about reclaiming my space, making it mine again. I threw out things that reminded me of Rachel, packed up the last of her belongings I'd been avoiding, and rearranged the furniture. It was a small change, but it felt like a fresh start, like I was writing a new chapter for myself, one that didn't have her ghost lingering in every corner. Later that evening, I took a walk around the neighborhood. It was something I used to do to clear my head, but I hadn't felt the urge to do it in a long time. The crisp autumn air filled my lungs as I walked down familiar streets, my thoughts surprisingly light. I passed the little coffee shop Rachel and I used to go to, and for a moment a sharp pang of memory hit me, but I pushed through it. That was the past, and I was more focused on the future. I didn't know what it held, but for the first time in a long while I wasn't afraid to face it. A few days later, Tyler and I met at Murphy's again, but this time it felt different. The last time I was there I had been a mess, trying to make sense of my shattered life. But tonight I felt lighter, more like myself. Tyler slapped me on the back as I sat down at the bar. "Man, you're looking better already," he said with a grin. "Told you you'd get through this," I chuckled. "Yeah, I guess you were right." We spent the next few hours talking about everything but the divorce, old stories, future plans, and stupid jokes that made us laugh like we were kids again. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't thinking about Rachel, the affair, or the life I thought I'd lost. I was just living, and it felt amazing. As the night drew to a close, Tyler gave me a knowing look. "So what's next for you?" Thinking about getting back out there, I shrugged, taking a sip of my drink. "Maybe, but not yet. I think I need a little more time." He nodded, understanding. "No rush. But when you're ready, you know I'll be there to wingman for you," I laughed, appreciating the offer, even though the idea of dating again still felt distant. For now, I was content being on my own, figuring out who I was and what I wanted. There was no rush to jump into something new. As I walked home that night, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: hope. The weight of the past was still there, lingering in the background, but it wasn't suffocating me anymore. It didn't control every step I took. I was finally beginning to see the future, something beyond the pain, beyond the betrayal, something that was mine and mine alone, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I was okay with that. I was okay with the unknown, because now I knew that whatever happened, I could handle it. I could rebuild and I could move forward. Rachel was part of my past, but she no longer dictated my future. And as I stood there, looking up at the stars, I realized something simple but profound: I was free.